So welcome to MyFest 23. This is using ChatGPT in writing and teaching, and session will be run by Anna Mills. So we don't have also official introduction. So over to you, Anna, so you can start.
Okay, thank you, Yasser. And it's nice to have kind of a small group. It just changes the feel. So I hope that everybody can feel comfortable, get a cup of tea, and feel free to speak up with questions or comments whenever you want. I'm going to be talking about using ChatGPT for help with our teaching, writing, and administrative work. I've taught writing at two-year colleges in the US in the San Francisco area for going on 20 years between tutoring and teaching. And I've written a textbook, but in the last year, I've gotten obsessed with AI and writing and how that's going to transform our teaching and how we need to adapt to it. So let's see. Okay. So this presentation is going to focus on just some basic orientation to how we might want to use ChatGPT, separate from questions of how we would integrate it into pedagogy or think about academic integrity. How would we personally use it in our professional lives? So I'm going to go over some ground rules, sort of caveats first, the warnings first, and then some possible applications and techniques for prompting and getting the most out of the system. Feel free to follow along with links or comment on the slides. I'll put those in the chat again as people come in. So let's see. Okay. So, all right. So how useful is AI? It's very hard to get, I think, a clear picture of this sometimes because there's so much hype. And there's also a sense that there is something really powerful there that maybe is in some ways a game changer. So how do we distinguish what's real? I think this article is more on the side of the hype from the New York Times, 35 ways real people are using AI right now, because the quotes they've chosen are sort of, it's revolutionized my life. It's like collaborating with an alien. Everything is becoming much easier. Feels like I've hired an intern, right? I mean, this is very attractive to anybody who is overwhelmed and busy, right? So I definitely feel that attraction. But I think we have to sort of play around, and maybe folks already have to a fair extent, and we can share experiences and tips from that as we go. So I wanted to start with kind of the caveats and the ground rules, putting those into these categories of disclosure, privacy, verification, and critique. So disclosure, I'm definitely in the camp of disclosing use of AI to generate, if we're generating sequences of text and we're inserting those into something that we are presenting, I would say we should credit that. We should acknowledge that. If we would acknowledge a human for similar assistance, that to me is a rule of thumb that's sort of easy to apply, even though there may be gray areas. And we might also want to acknowledge the human authors that ChatGPT was trained on, right? So we know it only works because it's trained on human writing. So acknowledgement is sort of a important thing. And in part, it's important, I think, because it's important ethically, and it's good for us to remember that, AI text, it's not really a secret, right? That something is AI generated, that a paragraph was put together by AI. We don't know what is going to be recognizable as AI at what stage. We know detectors are not very accurate, but they might become more accurate. So I think that it maybe is important to keep it in the back of our minds that this is not private, it's not a secret, what is AI and what's not. And on the topic of privacy, oh yes, thank you, Christina. Let me share those slides again. Welcome. And thank you, Irene, for sharing them. I just saw that you did that. Okay, so general rule of thumb, not to share sensitive or private information with ChatGPT, especially not student writing or data. Because when we look at the OpenAI privacy policy, it's pretty broad. They can use personal information to improve their services. That could include many, many things, right? To conduct research, to develop new programs and services. So we do want to watch out for that. Both because we, legally, do we have permission to share it in that way? And also because that information could potentially end up in later iterations of ChatGPT in some way. It could be shared. And then you probably have heard this, but we do know that ChatGPT fabricates, it does make things up. I don't like the term hallucinate because it suggests that it's actually experiencing something, but we do need to be able to check it. So we want to use it in cases where we have the capacity to check it. Either we have the expertise or we have some other way to verify what it's giving us, and we have the time to do that. So, the reminder that I want to keep in mind whenever I use it is that it's playing a guessing game. It's predicting what might humans likely write next. What would the humans write next? How would they continue from the prompt that we've given it? And I'm taking that framing from the researcher and AI humorist Janelle Shane, who I think is really brilliant and fun to read. If you get a chance to read her book, You Look Like a Thing and I Love You is a pickup line written by a large language model. So what that means is if they're predicting, that means that they're designed to produce plausible outputs, not necessarily true ones. They're predicting based on human data. So if there's bias in the data, which there is, there will be bias in the outputs of the AI system. And I know there are philosophical arguments about consciousness and sentience and understanding, but it seems to me that there's really no reason to think that a computer program is experiencing something or it has some deep understanding of something or has intention. So I kind of remind myself of that as well. So we might want to back up and ask, should we even be using ChatGPT? And clearly I am using it and I want to share that with you. But I think we don't want to completely forget. I want to keep asking myself and thinking about these larger concerns that surround the training and the use of language models, because these are still things that are evolving in terms of societal handling of AI and shaping of AI, democratic oversight. So looking at questions of copyright, I saw that I think Sarah Silverman just sued OpenAI for using her copyrighted work in its training data. Questions of AI colonialism, how if exploitative labor practices, and environmental harms, energy use from ChatGPT. And if you want to explore in the slides, I have links in there to those. So yeah, it's not a pure thing to use it. I still am using it personally. I grew up in Silicon Valley and I've always really enjoyed tech. Yeah, thank you. Great question. So let me back up. So first, how was Sarah Silverman able to know her material was being used? From the article that I read, which I think was in the New York Times yesterday, it suggested that, that they ran some tests on the model to see if they asked it about her book, was it able to make references to the book that it would only be able to make if it had digested the actual text of the book. And I think that's tricky to determine because it might have read a review of the book, right? That wasn't, that could have been public, but how do they prove that it actually had a shadow version of her, a shadow copy of her book that was scraped from the internet? And I don't know the details of how they tried to prove that, but I do know that there's been some evidence that, there are these shadow copies of books online that were used in the training data. Yeah, thanks, Christina. And then what do I mean by AI colonialism? I guess there are a couple dimensions. I'm not an expert on it. I know that MIT Technology Review had a full issue on AI colonialism, and I've read bits of that. And I think one of the great examples is the Time Magazine article that exposed that Kenyan workers who were being paid less than $2 an hour were reviewing really, really traumatizing and disturbing content for OpenAI in an attempt to, OpenAI was trying to control the model and avoid these disturbing outputs, but in the process, people were being underpaid to do this traumatizing work without enough mental health support. So there's questions of the human labor that's often through like Mechanical Turk or, the sort of underpaid labor that underlies AI. So it's very much made possible by humans, often labeling data sets or participating in training the models. And so the questions of that labor concerns around the training of the models, but there's also the question of data rights. So, who are the people whose data is being used? And is that replicating patterns of colonialism that we've seen for centuries? And how is it going to impact? So is it going to reinforce standard English? Because people are going to go to the model and it's going to spit out standard English rather than marginalized languages. So I think that's another dimension of AI colonialism. Is it going to reinforce English as a universal language? Thank you for that link, Dr. Saifo. Okay, so I do want to continue discussing those questions with my students and wrestling with them myself and advocating for regulation in the public sphere and for democratic oversight of AI. I've just decided personally to sort of do that on one level and also use the model, familiarize myself with it because I found it useful. I want to understand what my students have access to. And I want to understand how the writing environment is changing as professionals are using these models. I do think it's something that's useful enough that it's just going to continue to proliferate in some form. And I think there are better ways to use it, and I want to explore those myself. So I think I was inspired by Kyle Booten, who's an English professor at the University of Connecticut. He gave a talk on the idea that we could use these kinds of systems to actually make writing harder, he said, or to help us think, to push us to think, not rather than to skip thinking, right? So it doesn't have to be phoning it in using ChatGPT. It doesn't have to be for cheating. It can actually be to extend our thinking. And that's kind of the spirit in which I would want to use it. Although, it can also be used to speed up rote tasks, possibly. So in that spirit, one way to use it is to ask it for feedback rather than asking it for solutions. So ask it what could be clearer. Ask it for a counter argument to something that you've written. Ask it, what are the weaknesses of this grant proposal? How does this proposal line up with the criteria in the call for submissions, right? So sort of, I guess what I'm getting at is asking it really to challenge me to improve what I've done. And similarly, I could ask it to sort of ask me questions. I have to write a memo on this. What questions will the people in my department probably have that I should address, right? Something else I've done is to give it a really rough brainstorm, like a transcript of something that I've just spoken into a voice to text app like Otter AI. So I'll record myself talking and I'll follow that rule. If you've ever, read Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird Advice to Writers, where she says, you are free to write the worst junk in the world, keep writing. If you have to write, I think it's Julia Cameron who says, write every day and just keep your pencil on the paper. And if you have to write, I don't know what to say over and over, then do it. Right. So I was doing that, speaking into this app and having it produce a transcript. And the transcript was very, very messy. And I didn't want to, it was kind of overwhelming to actually read the transcript and try to structure it. So I fed the transcript to ChatGPT and I asked it to pull out some main ideas. And it gave me bullet points, which I didn't end up, I wasn't going to use those bullet points as text in my writing, but I used that to give me a starting place for thinking about what I wanted to say and what were some main points. So it was sort of just a step in my own process. I fed it something, then it sort of pushed me a little further and I reflected on what I wanted to say as a result. You could practice interviewing by telling it to interview you for a job, right? So that said, besides having it push us to think, it is very good at patterns. So anything that has a very formal set of genre conventions, we can give it an example or instructions or a template and ask it to convert sort of our rough ideas into that form, or to convert one form to another. So I will sometimes ask it for APA or MLA citations, or I could give it a template and ask it to check, and then give it my work and ask it to check the formatting. It's also useful for anything that is formulaic, so formulas on Google Sheets, or HTML if you have to put a little embed code into your LMS to get the video to show up the right way. It's not perfect, but here it worked. I asked it, how do I make a Google Sheets formula to count how many non-zero values there are in a selected data range? I just was stuck around, how do I figure this out? I know Google Sheets has 1 million formulas and I don't want to deal with their help system. So I asked ChatGPT and it gave me a function which worked. Sometimes it gives code that doesn't work and has to be debugged or has some flaw in the reasoning, but sometimes it works. So I think I mentioned giving it examples or templates, but this could certainly be applied to things like course outlines, lesson plans, rubrics, grant proposals, reports, where there's the previous year's example, or there's an example from a previous assignment, and there's a very structured format. So often, you know, say with a lesson plan, maybe I have the lesson plan, but I don't have the rubric, or I have the assignment, but I don't have the lesson plan for introducing it, right? So helping me translate from one format to another when there's something associated around ideas that I have. Another thing I used it for was to sort of analyze a document with a specific purpose. So I asked it to compare two different outlines for the same course, and the state one and the local college one. And I thought it gave some pretty useful points about basic differences in approach or philosophy between the state and the local and my local college's description of the course. And you can go from the slides to sort of see that example if you want. I have a friend who is on the autism spectrum who mentioned to me that she has run into trouble in the workplace because sometimes an email that she intends just to be straightforward can maybe comes across as cold or critical. And so, you know, this is one use, is sort of to run something by a ChatGPT and say, how does this come across? What is the tone of this email? Maybe give an example of the tone that you want. But I definitely wouldn't trust it, right? So consider its suggestion. Does it resonate with my purpose? So here I just tried giving it an email that I had sent recently and asked, is there any way this email could be improved? And it gave me 5 suggestions, and for the most part, I was like, nah, no, that wouldn't be a good tone. That's not what I want. That doesn't fit the relationship, right? But one of the suggestions was just really simple, that I could have used bullet points. And I thought, oh yeah, that would have been better actually, right? So would that be better than asking a friend for feedback? Probably not. But on the other hand, I don't want to bother my friends all the time, right? With something that maybe seems minor, but yet I would like to have a little bit of a dialogue about it, or some kind of feedback or response in my process. Has anybody tried something like this that you'd like to share at this point? I've been talking for a while straight. Yasser, yeah.
Well, I just have to say that I've tried multiple AI apps, and they were really the one thing that I commonly noticed in all these was the pattern that was being always presented to me. And by the pattern, I mean the idea of it has one format, it has one route that it goes. As you said, it's just a way of, if you give it an email, it was just write, I hope this email finds you well, and then ending with best regards. So if you're writing to a friend, this tone wouldn't fit in the context, right? And if you're given it a grant proposal, which I actually did once, it just wrote, for example, grant objective, and then between brackets insert objective, and I just gave it the objective in my guidelines, and but it doesn't have the kind of depth to go with taking the information that you have and transform them into a movable and something comprehensive, something dynamic that you can take and present. Similarly, I saw some people writing their PhD proposal with that, and it was really catastrophic in a sense that in a sense that it fakes citations. Not to mention that the ideas were not really coherent.
Interesting. Okay, so a couple things. I would say, first of all, there's this issue of access to the GPT-4 models. Like, I do think there's a difference in quality between the free model and the one that's $20 a month. So that is just something that I'm doing is, that's a work expense as I'm considering it now. So sometimes you will get better results with GPT-4. I'm showing the screen of ChatGPT and it would select GPT-4. Definitely watch out for it fabricating things. I would say as far as the tone, yeah, I don't think it's probably going to get exactly the right tone that I want for a particular relationship, with its own history and context. But on the other hand, if it gave me something really formal, I might try saying, I know this person really well, we're colleagues, but could you write that a little more informally and see if it created something that fit a little better with how I know that relationship to be, So if it's giving you something you don't like, I would always say, tell it that, and tell it to try again. Because sometimes that will work and sometimes it won't. Yeah, let's see. Meg is saying, I used Bing Creative to write a more engaging training workshop description. I've also used it to create rubrics. Interesting. So I'm curious if it did seem engaging, like, did that work? Sometimes I've asked, for something exciting and it sort of seems canned, and other times it seems fine, like it is dynamic. So
this was much better, much more engaging, and
okay.
I think will attract people more. So yeah.
Cool. Okay.
No, I thought Bing Creative was GPT Chat 4 because it's in Microsoft. So I thought it was
yeah,
better.
It is actually. That's a great point. I should have raised that. You don't have to do the $20 a month. You can use Bing Creative, which is running on GPT-4. So that's sort of a free way to access GPT-4. I'm not sure. I use it sometimes. So I'm not sure, like, if there are differences in how in the use experience, but I do know that it's running on GPT-4. So that's a great point. Yeah. Oh, that's great to know, Christina, that you've given it a sample of your writing and you ask it to write the email in your own voice and that's working for you. That's amazing. I haven't done that yet, but that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So another thing that I tried was just to simply ask it for alternate title suggestions for the categories in my resource list on AI. And it gave me some good ones. I really like this idea from Dr. Philippa Hardman, who's an instructional designer, of using AI to sort of help us push our own teaching in the direction that we want it to go. I know that I'm always sort of recognizing that my tendency is to be too negative in my feedback to students, and that I'd like to be more positive and motivating. And I try, but to sort of have a system that will check for me and that will provide suggestions for how to rephrase things in a more motivating way. So we can also do that with things like, I want my learning objectives to be more concrete, or I want to add statements like, so I can, to connect the learning objective to, the task that students will get better at, so they can see the practical application. So, it's a way to sort of encourage that kind of habit. So giving it learning objectives and saying, can you add the so I can statements, right? And then revising them to see if they actually fit. Now, I don't know, has anybody tried using code interpreter? So this is a whole area of exploration that you can actually use it for data analysis. Even to create charts or graphs or describe patterns, things that we might otherwise use statistical software for, or, have to hire a researcher to do. We can try doing it with ChatGPT and with this plugin called Code Interpreter, which is available to the Plus subscribers. You can actually upload a file of many formats, right? So spreadsheet or code or just a PDF. You don't have to paste text, but you can upload files. And you can ask it to analyze patterns. And I got mixed results when I've done that. I don't know if others want to share experience, but I asked it to analyze a set of hundreds of comments on my resource list and to pull out some positive comments and quotes. And it did. So it gave me word for word quotes from my data that I was able to verify. Because I thought, it is a predictive engine. What if it pulls something out, but it changes it, right? And actually, Ethan Mollick is a well-known sort of educational influencer on this. He's a Wharton Business School professor. And he shared sort of the results he found to be amazing from this, where it had analyzed the data and created a graphic and a textual analysis that he considered to be mostly accurate, but it had just changed 2 numbers. It got 2 numbers wrong. So, we can't trust it, right? So we've got to be able to verify, but at the same time, it might be able to give us a broad picture that we could verify of patterns in the data. And another use that I use as a go-to is for research. And I've seen people commenting more and more on Twitter that that they maybe go to these systems rather than, say, Google Scholar even, that this is going to supplement and sometimes, in some cases, replace traditional database search engines, mostly because of ease of use. So if you go to Bing and you describe your quandary or your question, it will find you real sources now, right? Links that will take you somewhere. If you go to elicit.org, it will specifically search scholarly databases, but it will also do things like suggest research questions or synthesize, compare sources. It will give a 1-sentence summary of the abstract. And those are all subject to the same problems that all these systems have, right? So sometimes it will summarize incorrectly. And even Bing, I found to sometimes misunderstand my question, right? Quote unquote, misunderstand, but it'll give me sources that actually relate to a different question, right? And maybe it'll summarize them incorrectly. So sometimes it's off, but sometimes it's spot on. And I have used Elicit with students, and they really liked the interface. Perplexity AI works similarly to Bing. Explain Paper will allow you to sort of chat with academic papers. So these are definitely tools to consider. And here's an example of Bing getting something wrong. And I think that this will possibly improve, because you can see that it just sort of searches on keywords from my question. And then it basically answers an easier, more generic question in this case. So I'm curious here if people are willing to share some tasks that you would like to try it with, either something you've already used it for, something that would be the next step for you, whether that's like evaluations of your own work. People already mentioned email, funding requests, lesson plans, job descriptions, program reporting, data analysis. I created a little Mentimeter so we could kind of share it and have a board of see and maybe comment on each other's suggestions. If you're willing to go to that link that I just put in the chat, or you can go to menti.com and put in the code 37304629. I would love to see what's the next thing you want to try it on. And you could even just put up a question as to something you might want to try it on, but you're not sure if it's a good idea, or you're not sure how to go about it. So let me give you a moment to do that. And I'll bring up cool, recommendation letters. Yeah. Lesson plans. I'm curious with the lesson plans. I've seen people suggest using it for ideas on how to present something or ideas for class activities. But I think I might be more likely to say, here's what I want to do, but I haven't thought through all the categories of the lesson plan. So give me a structured lesson plan. And then I would use that to think through how I want to implement my idea. Summarize lesson observation write-ups. Oh, I love that. Yeah. I was even thinking, say if I were to teach online or even just to record the class with student permission, what if I gave it, say, the Zoom transcript and asked it to describe what happened in class? Because I don't often take the time to make notes on, to make those notes on how class went, but I would really value that if it could be speeded up. Write an email to an angry student. I love that. Yeah, any moment where I'm freezing up emotionally around a task is a moment when I could say to ChatGPT, how could I approach this? Give me 5 ways to approach this. And maybe that would just get me through my my emotional block. And then maybe you can recognize from that email to an angry student, which are the approaches that actually that you would endorse with your own values. Give it textual forms and let it transform it to graphs for research. I've played around with this a little and I haven't yet become super proficient at it, but I know with Code Interpreter, I was able to ask it to generate graphs and it made some bar graphs. Summarize threads. Absolutely. Create rubrics using developmental language based on assignment instructions. Criterion, performance levels, descriptions. Created an amazing draft in a grid format. Okay, awesome. Yeah. Things that are just, we've done the basic important thinking, but the micro steps are tedious. Yeah, I would use it for that myself. Okay. So if you go on to the next slide, I did want to sort of be devil's advocate a little bit and have us consider like, okay, given privacy considerations, you can use the arrow key just to go to the next slide. And it asks, would you consider it okay to prompt ChatGPT in the following ways? So I think somebody mentioned recommendation letters. But is it actually okay to give it information about a student and ask for a reference letter? Is it okay to give it student work and ask it for feedback? Would you do that taking, what call would you make on that? I've already cautioned about giving it sort of student work without permission, but I know some people have said well, I don't give it the student name, or they sort of have workarounds. So it would be nice to know, like, are all of these uses not okay, or are some of them okay, or maybe in the middle? You're not sure yet. Would you say, give it a colleague's email and ask for suggestions on responding? Would you give it that angry student's email and say, how do I respond to this? Or is that a breach of privacy? I've been tempted to give it student evaluations, give it like a spreadsheet of student evaluations and say, what are some trends that you notice here? So would that be okay? Take a minute to consider which of these would be okay, or you're not sure. They're all tempting to me. And I've just been kind of asking myself these kinds of questions over and over these days. Thank you. 2 people participated. Anybody else want to jump in there and rate? I'll leave a couple more minutes. Yeah, it's interesting. On that last one, give it a colleague's published assignment and ask it to generate a rubric. I put that in thinking, yeah, of course that would be fine, because if it's published online, it's sort of fair game. But then I guess a counter argument to that would be, well, just because something is available publicly doesn't mean there are no restrictions on how it's used, of course. And if I'm, certainly there's still these open questions around whether the way these models were trained was even legal. Scraping all of the copyrighted material from the internet and using it as training data, was that legal? So would it be legal then to use any, like, feed it a New York Times article? I have been doing that. I have been generally considering it okay if something is public online to feed it into ChatGPT, but I can imagine somebody might not think that was okay. Does anyone want to speak to that? Would anybody object if somebody took your published work and fed it into ChatGPT? It looks like, people are still in the middle about that one. Wow, people would give student evaluations of a course. I've assumed that wouldn't be okay. I suppose I could ask students, or I could disclose ahead of time that I would be doing that before they make their evaluations. That's interesting. I haven't felt comfortable doing that. But would anybody want to convince me otherwise, that it's okay to put in student evaluations of a course? Okay. Yeah, I think I might give it a draft of my own feedback on student work, because that's me writing, even if I'm writing about that student's work, as long as there wasn't any private information from their writing in my feedback. I probably would give that to the system and say, make this more encouraging, or something like that. Oh, thanks, Christina. I'm trying to stay pretty open about these things, the things that trouble me and I'm not sure about, but yet I am still making decisions as I go. So I just wanted to sort of introduce these questions, and we're going to keep running into these gray areas, I think, over and over. Yes, Mariam, go ahead.
I was wondering what would be the objection to doing that. If you notify the students in advance and you get their permission, you are doing it to get an analysis of all the data. What would be the problem there? I mean, with some of the other things, I thought of FERPA, of course, but if the students give their permission, then why are you on the fence, or
Yeah, well, I guess partly because I hadn't thought about it before I got the evaluations, and so I hadn't asked for their permission or notified them. But I suppose in future I could. I guess I would just be concerned that if usually I ask them to complete the evaluation as a homework assignment anonymously, and so it's not really optional. So even if I'm not giving them an opt-out, I would still want to make sure that I'm not pushing them to share something that they might consider to be private with ChatGPT.
Or withhold
anything. Yeah.
or withhold anything they want to say because they've been notified, maybe.
Yeah. I guess I could create, a more private channel for evaluation. And then I could say, anything you don't want to feed to ChatGPT, you could say in this other format that I won't give it. I could give them options that way. I mean, I don't think it's the most objectionable thing. I mean, you mentioned FERPA. So in the US, the Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that definitely would be a concern if we're talking about, asking these models to say generate a grade or feedback on student writing. That would be against FERPA, a FERPA violation, I think. A student evaluation, I mean, if it is their writing, I guess the question would be, do they really have a choice about it? I mean, that's certainly come up with plagiarism detectors like Turnitin that do use student writing as data for profit. Yeah, Danielle, did you want to?
I get what you guys are saying about the evaluations and all of that. And, even if the students were informed from the start that their comments in the form could be put into ChatGPT and so on, I think a few things to consider is that there's still a power imbalance. So as the professor who is saying that to the students, there's already that imbalance there that might feel like that it might put the students ill at ease. Also, depending on what year the students are in, there's a good chance that they don't fully understand the implications of any content that they write going through a system like ChatGPT. Like, we don't know where that output goes. We don't know how that material is being used. Now, it is an evaluation form, and it's not the student's personal work that they're submitting for a grade. It's an evaluation. So there's the purpose of the work to look at too. Also, if you're going to tell students, oh, I'm going to be running this through ChatGPT, what if they quote your name and say something really horrible or say something that's untrue? And that goes through the system. And now there's an untrue thing, horrible, said about you in the system. Is ChatGPT really necessary to help with considering the risks that we don't even know? Is it worth running something like that through ChatGPT? We I don't know how many of us here are academics, but perhaps we have the skills to use tools that are less risky for the same purpose, and also that don't involve some kind of power dynamic between the professor and the students. If I'm using a private tool to analyze the data, and I know that the output is, hopefully, I don't know if there's a guarantee that the output won't be shared by the system, even though it's, private, commercial, or even if it's open source. So I think the power dynamic has to be looked at. The purpose of the evaluation has to be used. And, if it's anonymous, well, students can write anything they want. I think there's a lot of issues there. Some students might be more aware of what these tools can do than we are, and some students can be very naive. So I think it's extremely important to be very, very cautious about how we use these things and how we use them when they involve other people.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. You said it so much more eloquently and forcefully than I had. And I think it also just points to the need both for regulation and for critical AI literacy. So for teaching our students and working with our students to help them understand and develop that data literacy, and some understanding of how data is used in these models, and also to think about some clearer guidelines in workplaces, right? And in society around what tasks we use these for. And if we want to use these for tasks like analyzing student evaluations, maybe we need a much more privacy protected way to do that. And maybe those exist. Christina's putting examples of that. So maybe that software does exist and we don't have to go to ChatGPT for it. So yeah, I appreciate that. I did want to just share a couple of prompting techniques before we totally run out of time here. Because I think there are some things that are simple, but also not completely obvious. I think you might hear this term prompt engineering, and I really push back against that. I don't think it has to be technical. I think that we have a lot of skills as educators, as colleagues, as managers around communication, and those are the same techniques that we might use with ChatGPT in many cases. Ways to draw out the person we're talking to. And so I think that a lot of this prompt engineering is really about building confidence and a sense of playfulness and just a willingness to try different approaches with ChatGPT and to be critical of it. But these can yield big improvements in the quality of what we're getting. So just trying it multiple times. We may, we do it 5 times, one of those might be quite good, whereas the first one might be kind of mediocre, right? Tell it what it gets wrong, ask it to redo, give it everything we have to go on. So give it the raw materials, the text we want it to respond to, examples of the output we want to see, sources. We can also take it step by step through a process. So people have found that in some cases, if you just if you just give it a math problem, the results might be so-so. But if you even just ask it to reason step by step, it will actually do better if it makes itself go step by step through a process. Or if you ask it to explain its reasoning, it will actually reason better. So I think also thinking about ourselves as the director, critiquing what it's doing and trying to describe to it more of what we want. So can you make that more friendly? Do that again, but act more as an editor than as a coach, right? Even something that might not seem like it would work, but telling it to be unbiased. It doesn't work perfectly, but it has been shown to reduce the bias in its outputs. So sort of don't be afraid to be bossy and very specific with it. We also might not think to ask it to critique its own work, but it can, I found in debugging code that if I just said, that didn't work, can you tell me why? Even if it was the code that it had given me, it was sometimes able to say, oh, there's a bug in that code. And it's like, well, why did you give it to me in the first place? But it doesn't know that. It didn't have any purpose in doing that. But when I said that didn't work, it was able to find the bug, right? So even just asking it, you gave me a rough draft of this. Are there any flaws in that rough draft? It might be able to identify them. Another thing that I've just used recently that comes from Ethan Mollick is asking it for help. Like sometimes I don't know how it might help me with a task. So the idea of just asking it, like, here's what I have to do. Is there any way that your system could help me do that? What information would you need to help me? And it's, I've gotten some good results that way. So, I think another thing that's interesting to me is that you can get good results sometimes by giving it a really simple prompt, like, do you have any suggestions about this, right? But people also go the route of creating these mega prompts where you give it all the specific instructions, examples, context, just describe what persona you want it to take on. I want you to be a coach here, or I want you to be a really strict administrator. What would you say about this proposal? Right? So you can give it lots and lots of directions, or you can give it something really simple. And I think it's worth experimenting with both approaches for any particular task. And I have a little collection here of sort of, some extensive, some really short. I like this ChatGPT cheat sheet, which I have up here. I can share with you. It's just like a page of ways to use it for different tasks, and really simple, short, one-sentence prompts, as a way to sort of give ideas. Sorry, there's an ad there. But there are sort of like whole prompt engineering courses that are more extensive and still free. And there are these short cheat sheets, and I think they're all useful. But I think the main message, I think, is that it's not technical, but the more that we're playful and we use our own communication skills and rhetorical skills with it and just kind of have the daring to try things, I think the more successful we're going to be. So let me stop there, and just see what comments and questions and tips you might want to share. If you have any other tips for working with it, that have helped or that have surprised you, that'd be great to know. Or anything that anywhere where you've hit a wall, where something hasn't worked and you're not sure if anything could work. I would love to hear it. Anyone want to share something you think it couldn't do? I know feel free to go. We're sort of at time, and I appreciate you all being here and participating, and feel free to get in touch. There's my Twitter, but all my social stuff, and my email is on my website at annarmills.com. And I'm going to keep doing probably a version of this presentation. So any feedback you have for me would be much appreciated about what I could extend or do more of or change or what wasn't clear. I would love to know. Thank you, Mariam. Thank you, Meg. And yeah, thank you, Yasser. There's a feedback form for MyFest, if you'd be willing to fill that out. Has anyone developed writing assignments for English courses that involve students using Gen AI tools? Definitely. There are a bunch of assignments. I'm just reviewing, there's a collection that's coming out in August called Text Gen Ed, but it's not out yet. But there's this 101 creative ideas to use AI in education. And so many of those are for writing classes that I can go find the link to that. I developed one that's posted on Canvas Commons for having students annotate in AI critical analysis of a text and also compare that to a student written critical analysis. So I think, yeah, I'm curious, Christina, if there's a particular application that you're interested in. I think people are exploring a lot of different ways. The one that I saw that was really cool was having students sort of read 3 essays and not telling them which was AI generated. Having 3 essays, 2 of which have misinformation. One is AI and one is not. And one is human written and is accurate. So it kind of drives home the point that we might find misinformation in human written work as well. Oh, thank you for putting that link in, Meg, to the 101 creative ideas to use AI in education. And Fatima had a point about a Donald Clark link. I thought that was really interesting. I'm going back to see if I can find that. For some reason, I'm not seeing it.
I just deleted it. Should I place it in again? Because I thought it was out of context, but yeah.
Oh, no, I wanted to respond to that. Yeah, no okay. special context. I was curious about that. I've seen Donald Clark's.
Yeah, so he's
to be provocative, right?
Very provocative.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of
I'll
commenting
be curious
on
to read that.
Yeah, anyways, yeah, he takes issue with the notion about, ethicists debating about the use of AI. I just wanted to ask though, the environmental concerns, and that's something that plagues me too, because we're sort of endorsing we have to do that in higher ed. So we've got to get students on board with the competencies. But I wonder, I've been reading a lot about the huge environmental costs. Do we make students aware of that? And of course, there's an argument of, well, you could debate about everything else that you use currently having that kind of impact. But I was just sort of, saying that is the onus not on us also to ensure that whilst we're using these tools, we also, make students, aware of the costs of all the other underlying issues, behind these tools. So yes, again, responsible use of AI tools, because the large language models, I believe, do consume a lot of energy. When there's various AI tools that consume different types of, I don't know, I'm not an engineer as such, but
I have a friend, Lauren Goodlad, who has really been driving that point home with me. And she really disagrees with some of the ways that I'm using it. And she says, every time you use it, that's a bottle of water. Like, it's using a lot of water just to cool the servers, or however I don't know. And I really should read more about it.
I suppose the counter argument to that is that AI might assist us in developing ways to to countenance climate change issues. So yeah, I guess there's always a counter argument to all of these concerns. Anyway,
it's true. I mean, I tend to think about, well, we really should be looking at all of our energy uses in relation to technology and video streaming, or even my friend brings up that storing everything on the cloud instead of on hard drives uses an immense amount of energy. So, working in Google Docs, I don't know how each thing compares, and I should know better. And it is something I'd like to have my students read about and learn about myself with students and discuss. I don't know. My feeling is that, that I still want to engage with it if it's something that's that powerful that we are going to use it, and we need to figure out sustainable ways to use it. Sort of like search or air travel. There are impacts, and there are ways to mitigate those impacts. And we could advocate for just reducing use, but how well is that going to work is another question I have.
Of course,
But I appreciate that you raised that, and I don't feel that I have the answers. Let's see, I'm reading Christina's comment. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I would say is just that I want to just be transparent with my students that I want to use these tools responsibly and ethically, and I want to interrogate them. And it may be that there are gray areas and downsides, and that there's not a perfect responsible use. And there are these very exciting ways to use them. And there's a sense that if students are using them anyway, we need to be giving them guidance as to how to use them more ethically in ways that help promote learning rather than taking the place of learning. So yeah, I'm thinking about creating sort of a crowdsourced list where instructors share ideas beyond what that wonderful slide deck that's 101 creative ideas. I kind of wanted to have something that could be a living document where we just share a couple of sentences about what we tried and how it went. So if you're interested in that, I'm talking with different people who might want to collaborate on it, but I can show you what I have so far. let's see, where's my little bit.ly for that? AI related teaching experiments. I haven't launched it, but I was thinking of just doing basically a Word document that where people could suggest, you know, what did you try and how did it go, and share links to more information. Because I agree, I think that the more we share early, like rough ideas and descriptions of what we tried, even if it wasn't perfect, I think that the more quickly we can move and the more sort of collaboratively we can support each other, because the landscape is changing so fast. We don't have time to sort of peer review it for a year before we share it, because it will maybe out of date by then. Or we can do that, but we might also want to do something that's quicker and more informal. I mean, certainly one easy thing to do is to, now it's very easy in ChatGPT to share a chat as a website. So like, I don't know, here's a random thing a chat that I did, and then I can click share, and that creates a website that I could then share with students and have them critique or annotate using social annotation like hypothesis or perusal. They can write a little comment in the margins. So that's a way to have students analyze and critique AI output, even without requiring them to make an account or use one of the models. So that would be less resource intensive. Another thing I saw was someone who had students get ChatGPT to respond to the Declaration of Independence, and or actually I think they used the Explain Paper app to have it explain sections of the Declaration of Independence, and then the students could ask it to do that in relation to their favorite like pop culture characters. So they had like, okay, you know, this sentence in the Declaration of Independence, explain that with an example from Friends, or explain that with an example from Gravity Falls, or Indiana Jones, or whatever, Star Wars. And apparently it went pretty well. And then the students, though, were asked to critique its explanation and to be skeptical of it. And then they had the students ask it factual questions about the Declaration of Independence or about the Founding Fathers, and then they had the students check the facts. So I think that was, you know, maybe a way that's still exciting to students who haven't used these models too much, and maybe also individualizes, you know, allows the students to sort of connect it to their lives in a way that's customized, that could be fun. I thought that was a neat idea. Any other, you know, nothing's off topic if anyone wants to ask or question. I know we're past time, but I'm still happy to chat for a few more minutes.
Well, thank you, Anna, for this session. It was insightful. And I probably also saved the chat, so and you can also save it for yourself, so you can have the resources that were shared in the chat saved to your computers. I'm gonna stop the recording for people to share things if they are willing to share something behind the recording. Okay. Thank you, Anna.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, Christina.